キヤノングローバル戦略研究所研究主幹杉山大志です。本日はアメリカのですね、エネルギー分析センターの所長をなさっているマーク・ミルズさんをお迎えしてですね、お話を伺います。で、話題はですね、AI とその AI を実現するための電力といった話であります。マーク・ミルズさんが最近出されたレポートにこういうものがありまして、AI が大変に進歩していると。で、エネルギーとかですね、それから経済的な影響というのはどうなるんですか。そういったことを分析した、非常にデータがたくさん詰まったですね、興味深いレポートです。これからマーク・ミルズさんからですね、お話を伺うんですけど、その前にですね、このレポートからですね、いくつかのグラフを私から紹介したいと思います。まずですね、この AI は、データセンターで計算をするんですけれども、その電力需要というのは世界で爆発的に伸びているという話でして、このグラフですね、2010年から2050年までの予測が書いてありますけれども、現在ですね、これがこのグラフで言うと1000ぐらいのところまで来てて、これ単位テラワットアワーっていうんですけど、この1000っていうのはこれ日本の全部の電力需要がこのぐらいです。で、今そのぐらいにこのデジタルのための電気ですね。だからデータセンターだけじゃなくて、通信だとかそういったものも入ってるんですけど、それが今日本丸々1個分ぐらいの電力が使われていると。で、これがですね、今後ですね、向こう10年ぐらいでぐわっと伸びると。また日本丸々1個分ぐらい付け加わるのにもう数年しかかからないと。そういったことが予想されているわけです。データセンター、特にAI はですね、大変に電力を食うわけですね。で、それがこれから急増するということが予想されていると。で、これはまた別の予想ですけども、今度はですね、これはアメリカのデータセンターの電力需要の予想で、これも、ここは2025年、今ですね。で、右端が2030年。で、それまでに、今はこの、200ぐらいしかないんですけれども、これが一番極端な予測だと1000ですね。これまた日本が丸々1個分ぐらい付け加わるという、そのぐらいの電力需要の増大がアメリカで起きると。アメリカの電力っていうのは日本の4、5倍あるんですけども、それがさらに日本丸々1個分すぐに付け足すと。そういった予測もあると。で、中にはもっと低めの予測もあって、これはどっちかというと極端な方なんですけど、それにしても2030年代にはですね、もうアメリカの電力っていうのは日本が丸々1個付け加わるぐらいの、そのぐらいの伸びをするのではないかという予測がされているわけです。で、このですね、急に伸びる電力需要を満たすものは何かっていうと、原子力とかだともう時間が足りなくて間に合わない。それからデータセンターっていうのは一年中回っていないといけないので、太陽光とか風力じゃ間に合わない。一年中電力が供給できない。それからコストも高いっていう問題があって。そうすると、アメリカでの解決策っていうのは基本ガスによる火力発電所になりますと。で、実際ですね、このガスタービンの、普通のガス火力発電所のですね、そのタービンですね、発電する機械が、もう注文がですね、もう殺到していて、向こう何年か、2030年までもかつてよりもはるかに高い水準で注文が出ているということです。で、もうこのガスタービンですね、大きい天然ガス発電所じゃ、もう間に合わないっていうんで、このエンジンですね、ガスエンジンでもって発電するという、そういうのもどんどん増えてきていると。これは過去ですけども、2019年までのデータなんですけども、この水色のところがですね、このガスエンジンがこれだけ導入されてきて増えてますということです。こういった話ですね、このレポート、これ以外にも図面がいっぱいあるんですけれども、今日はですね、詳しくはそのレポートの方をご覧いただくとしてですね、そのエッセンスをですね、マーク・ミルズさんとお話しして聞いてみたいと思います。Mark, could you kindly introduce yourself and your institute and share the key highlights of your latest report titled The Rise of AI, a Reality Check on AI and Electricity Demand?
Thank you, Taishi, for inviting me to join you. I would be much happier if I was in Japan sitting down with you, but next time. So, as you know, about a year and a half ago, I founded this new energy think tank called the National Center for Energy Analytics to establish a voice, an independent voice for a think tank that's focused exclusively on energy. There's remarkably few of those. Most of the energy scholars, if they're not in universities or government, are inside of other think tanks that focus on other issues, law, government, environment, and geopolitics, all of which are very important. I've spent much time, but obviously you think of the world differently if you're using the lens of energy to look at all these other issues. So that's why we formed it. And with partners in Texas. Texas, of course, is a big energy producing region that's global in impact. The Institute has a group of scholars and advisors who have been well recognized, each in their own right. And we all participate in what we like to think of as reality-based information. And by that, I mean trying to avoid advocacy and analyze and criticize policies that are advocating for something or support policies that are advocating for something based on facts. So the obvious thing is the overwhelming Western world policy is to transition away from hydrocarbons. We think a sober analytics shows that not only is that not happening, but that it can't happen without regard to why anybody would want to do it. It just isn't happening. And it doesn't matter how much money we're spending on it. It's still, in fact, the data show it's not happening. And again, the word transition has a meaning. It means that you're leaving behind something and transition to something else. And that's not what's happening. What's happening is we're seeing additions, expansions of everything. This latest report was the first one I've authored as a scholar inside of my own think tank because we've been busy building our think tank and inviting scholars to join us. And I chose to write about the impact on energy markets from artificial intelligence because it's a subject I've written about and studied for, 3 decades, a long time. And I began my career, in fact, in the manufacturing semiconductor fab and designing processes for making large-scale integrated chips. So it's where my career began as a physicist, is in how you make computer chips. And to put it simplistically, from the very beginning, it was obvious to me that the goal in making computers faster had nothing to do with making them smaller. It had to do with taking energy out of each logic operation. If you take the energy, the inertia out of it, you can switch faster, a faster chip. But the way you take energy out of the operation is you shrink it. So the shrinking was a consequence of the goal of chasing velocity. So everybody's amazed, oh, they made them smaller. The goal was to make them faster. This particular study, the goal here was to try to get some framing for how much more electric demand we should expect to come from the huge build out by big tech, by data companies in new data centers that are oriented primarily towards artificial intelligence and large language models. I'll tell you the bottom line is that in the United States, it looks to me like there would be a floor that is the lowest likely additional demand from data centers would be around 50 gigawatts, 50,000 megawatts of new demand for electricity from just data centers by the year 2030. It could be double that, a quite reasonable sort of range. It certainly is very unlikely to be much lower than that for the very simple reason that in the last 4 years, that is since the Chat GPT came on the world as a democratized AI, and as you know, AI has been around for many decades, but it's the tipping point where it became truly remarkable and easy to use. We'll call it Chat GPT moment. In those 4 years, counting this year, the United States has added about 15 gigawatts of new data center capacity already. So that's roughly speaking more than all the data centers that have been built to date in the world. So it's a lot of capacity already built.
ここからですね、私とのQ&A やり取りにしたいと思うんですけれども、その前にですね、少しだけ私の方からスライドをお見せして説明しておきます。日本の電気料金はですね、この東日本大震災が2011年にあって以来ですね、上がってきたわけです。これ赤が家庭の電気料金、青が産業の電気料金、どちらも上がっている。で、上がっている理由っていうのは、一つはその再生可能エネルギーですね、太陽光発電や風力発電をどんどん導入してきたということがある。で、その一方でですね、火力発電所については、使わないようにということをやってきたわけです。で、ここに来てですね、ところがですね、日本の電力需要っていうのは、 伸びようとしていると。かつて2011年以来、日本の電力需要っていうのは2022年に向かってどんどん下がってきたんですけれども、これからですね、AI のデータセンターとか、あるいは半導体工場とか、そのデジタル関連の需要が伸びて、2034年には今より 6% ぐらい、5.8% ぐらい電力需要が伸びると、こういう見通しが政府から示されています。ただ、ここで疑問になるのはですね、電気料金がどんどん上がってしまっているというところで、本当にこれだけの電力需要が伸びることができるんだろうかと。むしろこういった電力需要を伸ばすためには、電気料金が安くなきゃいけない。そうすると、アメリカで今議論されているように、マーク・ミルズさんの議論にあったように、天然ガス火力発電とかですね、石炭火力発電っていうものが実は必要になってくるのではないかと。こんな問題意識を持って、これからマーク・ミルズさんと対話したいと思います。では、マーク・ミルズさんとの Q&A をご覧ください。In your report, the electric consumptions will be met by natural gas primarily. Is my understanding correct?
Yes, I mean, if we go on the basis of two things: what's actually happening, what are the data center builders doing, and what do we think they're going to do based on plans? What they're already doing, of course, is in some cases they're trying to connect the grid if the grids have enough capacity, where there's excess capacity. In a few cases, refurbishing old nuclear plants that were recently decommissioned or taken offline and refurbishing them. But by and large, what you're seeing is a lot of gas turbines being purchased and installed. Utterly overwhelming majority of the new supply is being provided by natural gas. Say roughly speaking, 80%. The other 20% is a mix of harvesting old coal plants, operating nuclear plants, siting where there's extra hydropower, where there's, in parts of the United States, there's various grids in the United States. In some parts there's some excess capacity, but it's a very strongly a natural gas story.
So let me ask a couple of questions now regarding your report. Well, as I understand, a major AI-driven inflection is underway, and one that will require a vast amount of electricity on a very short timeline. And this demand will be met primarily by natural gas power generation, as you said. With that in mind, does U.S. policy under President Trump adequately support this trend or not?
Yeah, I think first this President Trump's goal is to restore the United States to a sort of market-driven energy environment, and as everybody knows, he's not in support of the climate-driven energy transition. That was a part of his campaign platform, so it's not a surprise. Of course, the truth is the previous administrations that have tried to, and this is true around the world, but certainly in the United States, that have tried to effect changes in the energy markets to eliminate the use of hydrocarbons have been very ineffective because it turns out it's very difficult to do, to be simplistic. So this administration is certainly eager to support the expansion of gas production, gas pipelines, and gas consumption to meet the market's goals. And this is driven not by the desire to avoid or to use gas particularly. Again, I'll just say it's the practical reality is to meet the scale of demand at the velocity it's coming requires unprecedented. I mean, it's unusual. I don't usually use the words unprecedented. It's an overused word, but let me illustrate what's unprecedented about what's going on right now and why the data centers will be harvesting everything they can, but to be focused on what is available at scale at high velocity. So typical data centers that were built up until recently, the big ones, 10 or 20 megawatts of demand, some were 50 megawatts. We're seeing built data centers now in the United States and around the world that are anywhere from 150 to 500 megawatts. Some of them are intended to be, a gigawatt, 1,000 megawatt sites with, single use sites for large data centers. And they're building them in a few years. So the first 150 megawatts is available to light up, if you like, in 18 months. The next 200 megawatts in another year. There's never been a case in the United States, and I dare say this will be true for any Western country, where you've created a city's level of demand. a half a gigawatt, 500 megawatts is 250,000 people. And we're going to add over a period of 5 years, something on the order of 10 New York Cities worth of demand. I mean, it's like adding a couple of Tokyos of demand in a half dozen years, not in decades or decades, but in a half dozen years. This velocity of demand being added is really unprecedented in the electric industry history. And so, if you think about that much demand coming that fast, then you have to find things that you can build that quickly and supply the energy that quickly. And critically, and you know this, of course, this is not power that's amenable to being cycled. This is not loads that you're not dealing with consumers. You tell them to wash your clothes at a different time. Your data centers need power when they need it, 24/7. And this, again, dictates the kinds of power plants that you build.
On the other hand, let me talk about the Japanese situation. The government is implementing what we call the green transformation policy, that is basically net zero policy, Japanese version. Yeah. And for the net zero is the first priority of the government officially. And the result, the thermal power generation is effectively penalized in many different ways. And it's one of the reasons for which our electric tariff have increased sharply in past decade. And it's partly one of the major reasons is the rise in costs due to the mass introduction of the intermittent renewable like solar and wind.
Right.
Nevertheless, the Japanese government still expects that electric demand will be increased by around 6% over the next decade due to the AI and all those digital demands. But to me, it seems rather, I would say, contradictory. If you really want such a growth to really occur in the energy demand, then wouldn't Japan need to remove these penalties on thermal power generation?
I'm a Canadian originally, still Canadian, so I'm a dual citizen, and so I can criticize Canada. I'm always reluctant to criticize countries that I'm not a citizen of, but I'll render my opinion nonetheless. I think Japan makes a profound mistake, and in chasing energy policies that will have the effect of deindustrializing the country. So Germany and England have demonstrated the model of what happens when you avoid thermal power, which is dispatchable, not intermittent, inexpensive, and highly reliable. Industrial societies need low-cost energy that is highly available, that is built. The power plants can be built easily and quickly and dispatch power when you need it. If we want an example at the other extreme, it's self-evidently China. China is built more and has under construction more new coal capacity than exists in the rest of the world combined.
Right.
And with their cheap coal, as an example, China fabricates 90% of the world's polysilicon used for photovoltaic cells. And as I have told my friends, what that means is a typical small residence in the United States, which has solar panels on its roof to virtue signal that they're not using thermal fuels and emitting carbon dioxide. Those solar panels, silicon, were fabricated in China, preferentially in low-cost coal-fired grid areas. And that one small house consumed, to build the solar panels for one house, by my calculation, about 30 tons of Chinese coal. Now, the reason that China is able to compete so vigorously in these energy-intensive markets is with low-cost energy and low-cost electricity specifically. What happens is these are slow-motion train wrecks. Infrastructures take time to build, and it takes a while for the economic mistake to sort of filter into the economy. What Europe is now experiencing, and I fear Japan will experience, is a destructive increase in the cost of energy. To make the electricity reliable, you have to spend even more money. So what Germany is experiencing is a high and escalation in the cost of electricity, not because when windmills operate, they produce expensive electricity, or when photovoltaic cells are operating. When they are operating, they produce inexpensive electricity. It's a very well-known fact. The problem is to make sure that you have electricity when they're not operating increases system costs by far more than what's saved by operating the low-cost solar and wind when nature permits it. So the real risk here, I mean, let me just be biased. We're in a multipolar world where there are friendly nations that are democratic and those that aren't. And the precious few large nations, by that I mean large economies like Japan, the European Union, and the United States, which are counterbalances to the world's geopolitical situation, if they choose to deindustrialize, this is a very dangerous trajectory, not just for the citizens, but for the geopolitics of the world. And I would just say, I don't want to be alone as the United States as the only remaining industrial power. If Japan deindustrializes along with Europe, then I think the U.S. will be left alone, which would be assuming we continue down the path we're on now, which is to expand our industries, which is, of course, as you know, this current president's goal. And he knows you can't expand. I mean, any rational person knows you cannot expand your industrial base on the backs of unreliable, expensive energy.
Okay, I think it's very important message to be taken by a Japanese audience. Yeah, let me ask you a final question. As I understand, the major American tech companies have announced a net zero goal and or 100% renewable electricity goals, but it appears to conflict with your analysis because your analysis says that they are going to be mostly supplied with the natural gas power generation. How do you reconcile these two positions?
You know, this is it's words can be elastic so they can have goals and decide when they should think they can achieve those goals. So you can, without being cynical and critical, let's just say, as a practical matter, one could espouse a goal to be net zero eventually. But as a practical matter, in the near term, you have to deal with the facts that you have and the reality that you have, which means if you're building at this scale, by the way, including building the fabrication plants that make the chips themselves, which are also at huge scale. So the manufacturing of the chips that go into the data centers, the manufacturing of the steel and concrete and aluminum to fabricate the shell. These large data centers require more concrete, steel, and aluminum than a skyscraper. So, and we're building thousands of these globally. So the manufacturing of those requires energy, the operating them requires energy. So, and you need it quickly. So I think what they're doing is being sensible as a practical matter, doing what's required. I think they may have a hard time backing off their rhetorical pledges. In some cases, I'll say they're sincere. I don't think they're insincere about their pledges. I just think that what they've been forced to realize is the timeline for their pledges is far further in the future than they originally had hoped. And if that's where they conclude, then I don't have a particular argument with them, because once you get that far in the future, by that I mean many decades, it's beyond obvious that a lot of things, both in politics and in technology, will change long before we can have any arguments about whether we realize those goals.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mark Mills, for sharing your analysis insights, and I really appreciate.
Dashi, thanks for having me on. I very much appreciate your friendship and your hard work in Japan. I wish you the best of luck to help return some semblance of reality to Japanese energy policy.
Yeah, your information has been most helpful. Thank you very much indeed.